Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday Tablas Creek Instagram Live broadcast. This is the pre-storm edition. You will, I'm sure, be hearing the wind whistling around behind me. If you see me starting to shiver, well, that's because it's only about 45 degrees today. But it is beautiful here, and I'm super excited for this week. My guest is going to be Karen MacNeil, who is one of my own models and icons in the world of wine communication. She's done so much cool stuff, from obviously her books to TV to writing to articles. So she's done as much as really anybody in America, I think, to bring wine down to the level that people can understand it without making it seem simple. So anyway, I will be inviting Karen to join in just a couple minutes, but while we wait for people to join, as I always do, I want to show you some pictures of what things look like right now. So it is very, very green. Here's a good example of what things look like. We have sheep out in the on the property. You can see them enjoying all of that lovely green grass. Here's a shot of what the cover crop looks like in a section that the sheep were in earlier. We've got some new vineyard that we're developing. We're developing it a little differently. We're putting the wires up a little higher, which will allow the sheep to go underneath it without damaging the drip lines or the cordons. I have another picture with Sadie, my dog, posing under the wires, so you can see how high the wires are. That should be cool. We are waiting for another bout of rain, which should be really cool and fun, because there is a chance that we will get our first snow in about a decade. So I dug up one of the pictures from last time, which was 2011. So it is, but it's going to be an exciting week this week. We have also been working on bottling. Many of you know that we bottled our rosés a few weeks ago. We released our first batch of boxes for this year, which we did of Patelin Rosé, that we released them a week ago, and those are just about gone. We've got maybe 50 boxes left, so if that's your thing, grab one in the next day or two. We're going to be bottling again next week, including Côte de Tablas and Grenache and Counoise, which I'm excited about. The Counoise in particular is a favorite that we've been out of for a while. And we're also getting ready to put the next batch of tasting room kegs together. So these are all kegs that'll be filled up for us to pour samples out of for our tasting room. So we have 3 wines on tap right now in the tasting room, and the goal by the end of the year is that 75% of what we are pouring will be out of tap. So should help us with wine quality. It means that nothing will get oxidized, because every sip of wine will be fresh. It means that we will be wasting less wine. Won't be ends of bottles that we'll have to toss or send home with our tasting room crew. And it's no waste. It'll save us something like 10,000 bottles a year from ever needing to be created. So it just seems like it makes a lot of sense. Out in the vineyard itself, it is all of the wildflowers are starting to come. This is a wild bay tree that is flowering that we just saw this morning. So anyway, it's gorgeous right now, but remember, in a couple of days, it might look like this. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to invite Karen to join. There, I see. Momentarily. And really, I can't wait. Karen is one of the people who I look up to most in the world of wine. Hello, Karen.
Hi, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are things up north? Is it raining yet?
It is not raining and it's not snowing, but we too, just like you, are hoping that it will.
Amazing. Do you remember the last time you had snow up in Napa?
Oh my goodness. It feels like it was in the mid 2000s or maybe early 2000. It was a long time ago.
I remember there was a stretch where we had it like every other year. We had it in 06 and then in 09 and then in 11, and then we haven't had it since then. And I I think from all of the pictures that everybody has still stored, what happens when it snows for the 2 hours when there's snow on the vines is that everybody involved in wine goes out and takes a million pictures.
Yeah. And the dogs love it. The dogs just run all over the vineyard in the snow.
They remind you that they are really descended from Arctic creatures.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining me. I like to start by asking people to talk about their path into wine. When did you first realize that wine was something you were interested in, and how did it happen?
Yeah. Quite unusually, I suppose, I began to fall in love with wine when I was about 15. And my two favorite wines, the wines I drank all the time, were an 89-cent Bulgarian red, and on special weekend nights, $1.25 Liebfraumilch from Germany. And they were fabulous. I loved every minute of that. And I would often drink wine while I was doing my homework. Nobody in my family, by the way, has ever drunk wine. But for me, it always seemed astounding that you could take nature into your body this way, sort of effortlessly. You could buy this product that you didn't put on a shelf. It became you. And something about that idea was very, very compelling to me, still is.
And so were you aware of that at the beginning? Was this something that you were thinking about even in those early years, that these wines were from a place and had a history, and that sort of differentiated them from other beverages?
Yes, that's exactly what I loved about wine. And in fact, what made wine so hard for me to learn later was that so many wine books, so many of the early big wine books were sort of had culture and food and history and religion and art stripped out of them. They were just, here's the wine, here are the regulations, here are the grape varieties. And anyone who knows the Wine Bible knows that I wanted to put all that back in. Wine made sense to me initially in a cultural context. And I think we all feel that, right? Why does anyone come home from Italy just completely overtaken with passion for wine? It's thank you, because because you really see wine in its cultural context.
And I think that is one of the things that I've always loved about it. Um, so, how did you get involved initially in wanting to write about wine? I mean, you were a food writer first, correct?
Yes, well, so when I first moved to New York at the age of 19, hoping to be a writer, which by the way was a completely crazy idea since I'd never taken a writing class. I did not graduate with a degree in journalism, but I had this idea, and I lived in a fifth floor walk up in a part of New York called Hell's Kitchen. You can imagine what it was like. And I was writing about everything: poetry, politics, women's issues, just everything. And I collected 324 rejection slips, which I kind of thumbtacked to the wall of my apartment. And one day I got this brilliant idea, which was, oh, I should try writing about food, because I was on food stamps at the time, because maybe they give you samples, maybe they give you something to eat. And I thought, this is a perfect idea, this perfect way to improve the quality of the food that I was eating. And so over the next few years, I began writing more and more about food, because the first article of mine that sold, number 325, was a story on butter that I wrote for the Village Voice. And anyone who's watching or listening may know that, when you're a writer, you just need that first rung on the ladder. Once you've got that, you can begin writing, parlay that to write for other people. But after becoming a pretty successful food writer, I was writing for the New York Times Magazine and Food and Wine and Gentleman's Quarterly and Town and Country. I realized what I really loved was the whole world of gastronomy, including wine. But in New York at the time, it was really hard to learn about wine. In the whole country, it was hard to learn about wine. There were no wine schools. Retailers didn't do tastings. Unless you had affluent parents who turned you on to wine, there was really no way in, unless you yourself perhaps had a lot of money to buy wine. So then began the hard part.
So what did you do to teach yourself about wine given those constraints?
Yeah, I did two things. One is that I decided I was going to read everything I could about wine, even if it made no sense, because reading was free. And I thought, someday it's just going to dawn on me the difference between Montagny, Meursault, Macon. All these were, I was like, what are we talking about here? Where are we? Are these places inside places? What is this? But also a friend of mine in those days, New York was sort of, the wine world was controlled in journalism by about 5 men who wrote for everybody, from the New York Times to even Vogue magazine to Good Housekeeping. These 5 guys had every byline in wine. And wine producers from all over the world would fly into New York to do tastings for them, Chianti Classico on Tuesday and the port producers on Wednesday. And one of those men was a good friend of mine. And he knew how much I wanted to learn about wine and to eventually write about it. So he asked the others if I could join them in these tastings. And so they took a vote. And the decision was that I could, on one condition, which was that I not talk. It's unthinkable today for any young woman. But I took the deal. I didn't want to give my opinion, by the way. I knew I didn't even have an opinion, but I wanted to ask questions. But no, I tasted with them for about 6 years, almost every week, and never said a word.
That's amazing. It feels like a relic from a totally different era.
Welcome to the world that women live in. It actually happened a few decades ago.
Oof. So, what was the first wine article that you wrote?
In those days, the Napa Valley was known for, I was living in New York, but the Napa Valley had many more grape varieties were grown than are grown today. And a lot of those were white wine varieties. And people forget perhaps that many of the original settlers in the Napa Valley were German. You think of Schramsberg, Charles Krug, the Beringer brothers. These were all Germans. And so my very first article, if you can believe it, was on Napa Valley Gewürztraminer. I'm like, what? I don't even know if there's an acre of Gewürztraminer left in Napa Valley, but it was a very tentative piece, and I certainly wasn't going to tackle 61 Bordeaux or something with my first time out.
And what was that for? What was where was the article published?
I think it was published in Elle magazine in the 80s, which was the 80s and 90s were the heydays of great magazines. I mean, and there were magazines, just so many beautiful, well done, glossy magazines. And a lot of them were women's magazines. And so writers who were good writers had, there were a lot of places where you could get published. Now, as you know, there are very few magazines left in the United States.
And even the magazines that there are not, I mean, unless it is a wine or a food specific thing, they're not usually talking about wine. The outlets are fewer.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that long after that you must have started on the Wine Bible, because that was published. That was like the early 90s, wasn't the first edition?
I got the contract for the Wine Bible in 1991, and this is almost like one of those sitting on a stool in a drugstore in Hollywood stories, because I got a call one morning sitting in my apartment and the person on the end of the line said, "Hello, this is Peter Workman. Would you like to have lunch?" And I just nearly fell off my chair, because Peter Workman was, he was legendary in New York publishing circles, and I knew who he was, but I certainly had never met him. So he said, "Meet me at this restaurant in Soho at noon." So I go, and he said, "I read a piece you wrote. I had written a piece in the New York Times Magazine section the day before Sunday." He said, "So I read this piece. I really like your style. What book have you always wanted to write?" And I thought, this is not happening to me. Because my piece had been on food, it was on New England lobster rolls, actually. I don't know. Food has always been this crazy intro into wine for me. So anyway, he thought I was going to say, I want to write an American cookbook or something. And I said, if I write a book, I want to write a book about wine. And he said, "Wine? We've never published a book on wine. Could you have it done in a year?" And I said, "Absolutely." This was 1991. In 2000, I actually, delivered this giant manuscript. And just to finish that story, I was terrified, because once a year he would call me up and he would say, I hope you're not just sitting around in your pajamas." And I would say, "I'm not sitting, I promise you, I am writing this thing." But it's bigger than you and I talked about, Peter. So anyway, the day I hand bring all these manuscript pages to him, I'm terrified, because what if after 10 years he thinks it's terrible, right? So anyway, I'm sitting there quiet as a mouse, terrified, in his office, and he's just reading randomly, looking through the manuscript. And he looks up at me after about 20 minutes and he says, "It's fantastic, and we'll call it the Wine Bible." And I said, "Absolutely not. Absolutely not." I said, "Peter, I'm an unknown person in the wine world. That is too big of a statement. That's like too big of a statement. We can't call it that." And he said, "Well, apparently you did not read your contract well, because," and this is true in the United States, "a book's title is considered part of its marketing. So the author doesn't necessarily doesn't have a say in the title. You have a say in everything between the covers, but the title of a book is the publisher's prerogative." So it got called the Wine Bible.
Have you come around to that title over the years?
Yeah. Well, I had to now grow into, being the Wine Bible, and it really has become it has sold nearly 1 million copies. The wine book average is 8,000 copies. So over the course of its whole life, so 1 million copies it's a Bible.
We've probably contributed a few hundred of those in our tasting room over the years. So
Thank you.
Happy to represent. When you were putting it together, how did you differentiate it from the books that were out there? I mean, what was your thinking as to this is going to be the reason for this book's being?
Most writers and everyone who is joining us will know what I mean by this. Much wine writing is sort of show off, right? It's, here are all the great wines I tasted. Here's everything I know about Cahors. I also went to Rioja. Too bad you'll never get to go. It's kind of that tone. And I knew I didn't want that. And I also almost painfully remembered, all the questions I had when I was tasting with my 5 New York colleagues who were older men. And I remembered what was so confusing. And so for me, I kind of turned the binoculars around and thought, not what do I want to say? I thought about what confuses them? What doesn't make sense? Because wine is often not very logical, and it's not always automatically, intuitively obvious how certain things work. And A can be true, and C can be true, and B is not true. So you need a good explainer, a good teacher. But after I decided on those two things, I then didn't read anybody else because writers, there are writers who read their competitors. And then Jancis Robinson and I once had a conversation about this, and we both think about this the same way. People would say to me, this was the heyday, by the way, of the rise of Jancis and also Bob Parker. And people would say, wow, did you read Parker's review on X? And I would say, no, because I didn't want anyone else's voices in my head, right? I wanted to think my own thoughts. So it's, it's a lot of sitting with yourself and figuring out what would be helpful, what would be good, what would be useful. And even Peter Workman said to me, what I love about this book is that it'll probably be in the trunk of every wine salesman, squished under the bar of every restaurant. Good.
Yeah. I think that's it's a very clear-headed way of thinking about a book from the perspective of the reader. I mean, it's one of the things I used to teach web programming languages and information architecture and design. And one of the things I think that people often don't think about is that people go to a website most of the time with a specific task in mind, a specific goal. And if you're trying to make it as easy as possible for them to achieve that goal, they're more likely to come back than if you're talking about the things that, for whatever reason, are exciting to you. I mean, there's always has to be a balance between the two, but the idea of having kind of a reader-focused book seems to me to make a ton of sense. But I have to imagine that it was pretty unusual at least, especially in the era when you were first publishing it.
Well, and the other thing I suppose was that in the United States, I was one of the first women writers. I wrote not like a British man. And also one of the first American writers. A lot of British wine writing, I mean, I adore my colleagues in Britain, but, a lot of wine writing early on was very privileged. Was written by people who had been on the wine debate team at Oxford, or, this was a world that was not my world. So I automatically wrote about wine very differently and with a conversational American way, in a conversational American way. And even to this day, people write me letters, I have a file cabinet of them, saying, I feel like you're just sitting here talking to me. And that makes me feel good.
That must feel great. I mean, I know I referenced it just last week because we're putting together a petition to get Muscardin recognized as one of the grape varieties that can be used in America. It's the last of the Chateauneuf grapes to have to go through that approval process. And I was like, okay, there's a couple of books I'm going to go to just to show that like serious people in the world of wine have talked about this grape and they know that it exists. And like, okay, TTB over there, you should recognize this also so we can put it on a label. So
yeah,
I was just in there for something very specific just last week.
Thank you.
So you just published your third edition last year. It came out. How has your thinking about the role of the book changed since between the first edition and now, or has it not? Is it just updated in terms of scope and content?
It's a little bit like a house. If you were remodeling your house, you could get a couple of new pieces of furniture and paint the walls a different color, or you could take everything down to the studs, add whole new rooms and like really do it. So when you write a new edition, it's up to you as the writer how you want to go about it. You could just simply update every statistic. There are now 500 wineries in Hungary, and there used to be 350. Or you can really almost write a whole new book. And I decided on the latter. So whole new rooms, were there. Great Britain is a good example. I love the sparkling wines of England, and, Croatia and Slovenia got bigger. Those are all the wines of the former Austro-Hungarian Empire, which we didn't really know as adults in this country very well when those countries were still in the aftermath of communism and in the aftermath of being part of the Soviet Union. But those were the countries where, during the Austro-Hungarian Empire, many of the greatest wines in the world were made. So those places got a lot bigger. But the thing that most writers don't say, I suppose, is the biggest difference in a new edition, hopefully, is that you yourself got better. You became a better writer. You became a clearer explainer of a difficult concept. So I think I got better too.
That's fun. So, I mean, in addition to the Wine Bible, I mean, you still write for magazines. You've done TV work. You have your own website that you write for and that you edit for. Do you feel like there are ways that those inform each other, or do you have favorite sorts of outlets? Do you feel like there are kind of, I guess, channels or vehicles through which it's easier to bring people into the world of wine?
Well, I think COVID, accelerated everything for us, right? Accelerated what we're doing right now. Everybody knows how to go on and have a Zoom call now. And we certainly have done lots and lots of live virtual tastings with winemakers all over the world on Zoom. Yep, including you. And, the opposite of the Wine Bible, I've always thought that if you're a really good writer, you should not be in just one channel. So in 2015, I decided to do the complete opposite of the Wine Bible, something that was fast and digital, and to see if I could do it. Because that was a time when there all of a sudden started to be lots of wine blogs. But I would sometimes go crazy because I'd be like, but wait, this fact isn't right? So I wanted to see if I could bring, we're very good researchers around this office, and I wanted to see if I could bring the good research we do, Wine Bible level research, to something that was fast and digital. So Wine Speed, which is free, everybody's welcome to sign up. We have about 40,000 subscribers, and it has wine quizzes and fascinating facts, and so our whole how we write has certainly become very different, or at least we do both of these things, I should say.
And what is your thought on television and wine? I think it's been a medium that's been difficult for wine to get established in, and I wonder if you have any insight into why.
Yes, I used to do a regular spot on the Today Show, if you can imagine. This was a number of years ago. And even then, every producer in network television would tell you, oh my God, we're going to get 12,000 letters that say you're promoting alcohol at 7:30 in the morning. And so during that time, in the very beginning, the host would never taste the wine. I could taste the wine, but the host could never taste the wine. And then within a year, even I couldn't taste the wine. I could say to whatever host on NBC, it's spring and here are all these great Sancerres and Pouilly Fumés and Sauvignon Blancs from around the world, and they're delicious, and we could talk about that for 3 minutes, but not actually taste the wine. And today, it's next to impossible to do for any major network anything about wine. They're too afraid of what might be called the really strong religious right. You know, people forget that. I mean, you see Europeans all the time say, "Oh, America, it's such a big market. We're going to export to America." A lot of those producers may not realize that 40% of Americans do not drink any form of alcohol for religious reasons. So you can cut the audience right in half, number one. That the abstinence rate, by the way, in Europe is about 10% for most countries. So we are really an anomaly in that regard, but it has completely affected. Even you look at PBS, all the cooking shows on PBS, there's not a single wine show that has been, I don't know, that has been successful for more than a few years.
It's super interesting. I had never thought of it from that perspective.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense. Because TV it is sort of painting with the broadest possible brush. It's particularly network TV, where, super interesting. Thank you. I hadn't thought about that. So, what you're involved in all these cool things. I mean, you have books, you have the website, you have your own line of wine glasses. What are you looking forward to? What comes next?
Let's see. I always believe that if you want to get something done, you give it to a hardworking woman who's already balancing, 13 things on 10 poles. And luckily, my staff who's sitting here with me are kind of perfectionist women who love to do bunches of stuff too. So you probably feel this way too, that the best thing about a small company is that you can get a creative idea and just go with it. It doesn't have to go up through any kind of hierarchy or bureaucracy. It may not work, but so we're always hunting around for fun new things to do. And, a lot of our business today too is doing wine seminar tastings, but they're really entertaining and fun for private equity firms and global law firms and wealth management departments of banks. And, there's a lot of, you can't publicize these, of course, but
not open to
not open to the public. But all that business really accelerated when, as a result, in part of the women's movement and then Me Too, because in not so long ago, if you were a global law firm and you were going to take your 20 top clients someplace, you might take them to the World Series, or you took them to Pebble Beach to go golfing or something. Once women become a fairly established high percentage of those partners or clients, going golfing at Pebble Beach and leaving the women some other place, maybe 10% of those women play golf. But doing wine was great, right? Because everybody could do it.
Yep.
And it didn't matter if you were a novice or a collector, everybody could have fun in a really dynamic wine tasting. So that's true today. And some of our business is devoted to doing those kinds of seminars for essentially for high net worth individuals and companies.
It seems like that must have been something that was accelerated by COVID also. I mean, given that people couldn't get together in the same way, but like you could put together a wine tasting experience that could be shipped to them wherever they were.
Exactly right. And we did a lot of that in the first 2 years of COVID. I mean, we would be sending 40 partners, 6 bottles of Bordeaux, and each, and yeah, uh, it was fun. But you remember how in the early days of COVID too, everybody was a little rusty. They were used to a phone where they couldn't be seen, and so um, I think good communications over Zoom or over any visual medium require, I don't know, you have to be really comfortable with it. And my early experience doing television in New York and a little bit of radio too, helped me in that regard. Because I liked those mediums.
Yeah, we did a lot of those in the first couple of years. We're still doing a few of those, but it seems like at least the velocity of that has slowed down, just as people are now looking for opportunities to get together rather than to stay separate.
Yeah, and I also think that, whoever your boss was in the early days of COVID, if you kind of, I don't know, stopped doing what you were doing, stopped doing your work, and at 4 o'clock joined a wine tasting, I mean, nobody knew and nobody cared. And it's probably not so cool anymore to decide to jump on a Zoom wine tasting at 2 in the afternoon. Or we've actually started doing those things later because of that.
Yeah, us too. It's an advantage of being on the West Coast, is that often, like, I'm still in my work hours when this East Coast organization is doing a 7:30 happy hour. So
yeah, exactly.
um, I literally I could talk to you all afternoon, but it has been half an hour. I try to keep these to half an hour. But how, if people who want to learn more about all of the different projects you're working on, I mean, obviously, could follow you over social media, could go to winespeed.com. How do you want people to follow you if they don't already?
Yes, all social media platforms, our handle is the same, which is Karen MacNeil Co, just CO. And yes, WineSpeed is great because WineSpeed every week will come to your inbox on Friday, and it always includes things that I'm up to and things that you can participate in or join in on. And you can also contact us very easily, either through winespeed.com or karenmacneil.com. So yeah, and we love hearing from people. Often people give us really good ideas for content, which we totally appreciate.
Excellent. And if you are out there and you are one of the handful of wine lovers who don't already have the Wine Bible, you should.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Karen. It has been a pleasure. Good luck with the weather this week. I hope you do get a dusting of snow, and then it melts in time for it to be no inconvenience to anyone.
Thanks, Jason. It was a real pleasure to talk with you as well.
Excellent. And Tablas Creek folks, thank you for joining. I will be back in 2 weeks. My guest in 2 weeks is going to be MJ Towler of the Black Wine Guy Experience podcast. He's great and really fun. And if you don't know him, tune in 2 weeks and you will. So thanks for joining. Thank you again, Karen. And
thanks, everybody. And thanks, Jason.
Stay warm.